So our next presenter is Derek Holzhauser, who's Holzhauser, sorry, Derek, who's the CIO from the QAP. And Derek's going to talk about another aspect of risk, and that is digital defences, safeguarding pathology from digital threats. Thank you, Derek.
You might need to go a bit. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, everyone. I'd like to talk a bit today about cybersecurity and pathology. But before I do, I just wanted to share a photo of us exploring Malaysia on Sunday. And I can tell you that I'm actually still feeling all 272 steps. It was not good on the way down, I had to say, but it was beautiful. And after that, we had a beautiful lunch. And we've had a great time here. So what I'd like to talk about for the next 25 minutes or so is the importance of digital security and pathology. So what we're going to look at is what happens when pathology suffers a cyber attack. So how do the attackers get in? What do they do when they get in? And then what you can do to prepare for an incident. So what happens when pathology suffers a cyber attack? Well, I can tell you, based on Professor Malik's talk, that you won't be going on school holidays. So this has happened recently. There's a very recent attack and it's ongoing in the UK. I'm not sure if you've heard about it. So last Monday, the pathology provider for a number of large hospitals in London suffered a cyber attack, which was believed to originate from a Russian group called Quillen. And you know better than anybody else that pathology services are critical to a wide range of treatments. And the incident has had a major impact on the delivery of service to patients. So it's meant that the medical students have had to hand deliver written pathology results. The NHS trusts have been so overwhelmed that they're actually asking for donations of O-negative blood because they don't have time to do the cross-matches. So their emergency departments are still open, but they don't have time to do cross-matches, so they're asking for O-neg blood. They're cancelling cancer operations and cancelling appointments, all due to a ransomware attack on pathology. This wasn't a ransomware attack on the rest of the electronic medical record. All of that is still intact, but they can't access pathology results and it has completely crippled their organisations. So there was also a directive from the director of those organisations saying to make decisions based on your best professional judgment, because basically you're running blind without pathology. And that's what the GPs that are also impacted by that, they're concerned about the same thing. And when you've got a chief executive saying, well, just do the best you can because we can't help you, that's a really difficult situation to be in. And it just shows you how critical pathology is. Unfortunately, that's not the only one. So on May 8, Ascension Health, who run 142 hospitals in the US, suffered a cyber attack, again from a Russian group. And this got into the organisation from someone clicking on a phishing email. And so this actually led to the shutdown of their whole electronic medical record system and forced them onto manual processes. So that happened on May the 8th. They're still using paper today. So over a month later, they're still using paper. So you can imagine the chaos that's occurring in that organisation when you're using paper results, not only for pathology, but for all medical records. And they went from a completely electronic medical record to back to paper overnight. And they're expecting those systems to be restored sometime mid-June. And you can imagine in the US, there's the class action lawsuits are already coming. Alleging negligence in safeguarding clinical data. So So how do the attackers get in? Let's look at some of the key areas of vulnerability that we have in pathology. So we've got a lot of systems. Here's just a list of some of them. So laboratory information systems, we've got digital imaging, telepathology, we've got our connectivity to the electronic medical record. We've got our back office systems. All of our people have email these days, and that makes them an attack, a potential attack vector. We've got our infrastructure, our network services. You might have some services hosted in the cloud. And don't forget about your instruments. And again, Professor Malik mentioned our ageing pathology instruments, and they represent a risk, and I'll talk about that later. So let's have a look at what incidents are actually occurring in healthcare. But first I want to have a look at some patterns based on all industries, not just healthcare. So this is the pattern of all, data breaches from all industries. It was based on a 2024 Verizon report about data breaches. And if we look at the statistics for all industries, you can see that system intrusion attacks are responsible for the most data breaches. So a system intrusion attack, I'll give you a bit more information about those, but that's where your typical hacker getting into my system some way, whether it's been a phishing attack or whether they've got through your firewall or through some other vulnerability, that's what that is. So in most industries, system intrusion attacks are the highest. Let's have a look at health. Health, we've got miscellaneous errors being the highest data breach pattern over time. And you can see out of the three that are listed there, system intrusion is actually the lowest. So we're not doing too badly at protecting our systems from intrusion, but we're making a lot of these other miscellaneous errors that are leading to data breaches. We've also got a high level of privilege misuse, so people misusing the access that they've got to systems. So let's have a look at what these miscellaneous errors are. So 47% of our data breaches are related to miscellaneous errors. So what are they? Well, they include misdelivery. So we send a lot of things to the wrong person. And whether it's we get the wrong information and address it wrong, there's a lot of reports, a lot of confidential medical data that just get sent to the wrong addressee and that result in data breaches. Publishing errors, this is where people are putting the wrong information on websites or publishing data that should be confidential that they've made not confidential, or software misconfiguration, and this is where developers misconfigure software. So if you look at the breakdown of those miscellaneous errors, you can see again that healthcare is the top of the pile when it comes to miscellaneous errors. And I really think it's due to the amount of misdelivery that occurs in a healthcare environment. If we go on to look at privilege misuse that I mentioned, employee betrayal poses a significant threat because when employees steal personal data, they often collude with external actors, and sometimes they're being blackmailed, like, harm is going to come to you or your family unless you do this for me. Because they've got access to the internal systems, threat actors are using them as pawns to do their bidding. And personal data is often the prime target, but sometimes they're just looking for a way into the organisation. As with those other organisations, there's ransomware and extortion, so they'll get in and encrypt the system and then try to get money for that. So it's often financially motivated, but they're using an internal person to actually get that leverage. And 83% of privilege misuse breaches involve the compromise of personal data. So if we look at that, this is the statistic for all industries. So most threats come from outside the organisation, but insiders are dangerous too. So 83% of breaches involved internal actors. This is in all industries. And they're saying 19, I don't know how it ends up at over 100%, but 19% involved internal actors. This is for all industries. Let's have a look at the internal actor stats for health. 70% for health. So we've got a lot of insider threat that's happening. And nobody wants to believe their employees will steal data. But if it happened to you, would you know how to detect it? Because privilege misuse is the hardest thing to detect. If you've got someone that looks like they're doing the right thing, it's actually hard to, they've got access to this particular data. It's actually hard to detect whether they're using it for malicious purposes or taking it off-site. So how can you detect it? You can use audit logs and monitoring. So you can set up automated alerts for suspicious activities. Like if someone looked at a large number of patients in a short period of time, there's often systems that look, if you're accessing famous people, for example, you can tag people and have that in auditing. You should use role-based access control and regularly review and update the access permissions. There's a lot of organisations, when new people are coming into the organisation, they'll just say, "I'll give them the same access as this person." And they often don't review the role and say, well, actually that level of access might be inappropriate. The other is more sophisticated. It's using user behavioural analytics, and that's where machine learning looks at your behaviour and says, okay, well, this is not what you normally do. This looks like an anomaly, and someone will manually investigate that. The next highest category in healthcare is system intrusion. Again, that's low compared to everyone else, but we're still 13% of our attacks are system intrusion attacks. And these are complex attacks that leverage malware or hacking, and this is what happened in those two previous attacks that I showed you, those two real-world examples. And frequently they involve the deployment of ransomware. And so ransomware is where the software that's deployed encrypts and locks up all of your files, and they'll request a ransom for an unlock key. And often the unlock key doesn't even work, but there's so much data is encrypted that you're just hoping that it works if you don't have any sophisticated backup solutions. So what's helping these guys succeed? Unpatched vulnerabilities. There's a lot of vulnerabilities in medical systems because we've got a lot of old software still running. Our instruments, some of them are still running Windows XP, and it's embedded in the instrument, and as Professor Malik said, it's expensive to try and replace these instruments. It's still working, why would I replace it? You just got to recognise that that's a vulnerability. Incomplete deployment of security controls. So again, some manufacturers don't let you deploy antivirus software to their instruments. They say, no, it's not going to work if you deploy it. That's where you need to look at the instrument vendors up front and include security in your assessment of instrument vendors and say, we will be putting our software on your devices. You need to let us know what we need to exclude from that security scanning. Identity and access management is important to prevent credential theft. So ensuring that your identity and logon systems are robust and preventing credential theft. Lack of user education. So remember I said that the Ascension Health cyber attack came from someone clicking on a phishing email. I'd say the NHS one did as well, but that hasn't been determined yet. And that is often from a lack of user education. They just don't know what they're looking at, and they don't know not to click on particular links. In relation to phishing, just some statistics on the mail filtering software. It only catches about 80% in general. It's different for different pieces of software, but it only prevents about 80% of threats. So you've still got a lot of potential phishing threats coming through. So I just thought we'd take time for a quick quiz here. So the question I'd like to ask you is, valid user accounts are responsible for what percentage of successful cyber attacks? So this question is, when is a user account from your organisation responsible for a cyber attack? So they use that account to get into the organisation. Is it 2%? Is it 87%? Or is it 54%? So who thinks it's 2%? Raise their hand. No hands. Anyone for 87%? Yeah, quite a few for 87%. Rest 54%, or don't know, yep. It's 54%. So while it's not well done to the 54%ers. So while it wasn't 87%, that's still a massive number that they're leveraging your real credentials to get in. So user accounts should only have the minimum level of access required for a person to do their job. So don't go giving people, it's easier for me to manage, let's just give them everything. Don't do that. Only give them the minimum level of access required to do their job. If you've heard about all of the data breaches that are happening, you probably know that your credentials have been stolen somewhere. I think probably everyone in this room who has accounts has stolen credentials floating around there on the dark web. And that applies to credentials from our organisations as well. So what do we need to do? We need to use strong passwords. And I'll talk a bit more about why we need to use strong passwords. Remove employee access when they leave. It's surprising that a lot of organisations don't do this that well. Change default administrator account passwords. Don't leave the default passwords active on your systems, because you can Google what the default password is and the hackers will try that, and they've got systems that can run millions of passwords or billions of passwords a second against vulnerable systems. Use multi-factor authentication where possible. If you've got, and this applies to everything that you have online, use multi-factor authentication if the site offers it. Don't reuse passwords, and this is so important. If you're using the same password for every system and you've been involved with a single data breach, they've now got your password for every system. Use a password manager. A password manager lets you create really long passwords and have a separate password for every website that you go to. And the other thing that I'd encourage is, both at an organisation level and personally, is that you use some dark web monitoring or breach monitoring. And there's multiple sites that do this. Have I Been Owned, Keeper, Security. You can put your email address in there and it will tell you if you've been breached. And this is just an example of, we use Keeper at work, and I use it personally, and it does regular scans of the dark web, and you can see it says high risk password, change it, record in Vault immediately. And some of these are really short passwords, so it considers it high risk, and some of them are just for the air conditioner on my wall, so it doesn't matter. But it will tell you if you've been involved in any of these data breaches. So I mentioned passwords and long, complex passwords. So why can't I just have 6 characters? I get this all the time from our team at QAP. I'm not looking at anyone. Why can't I just have a 6-character password? So we enforce 16 characters at QAP. And initially they didn't like it, and I'm sure some people still don't like it, because every time they have to unlock their computer, they've got to type 16 characters in. So we get them to use a passphrase. Just think of a sentence and type that in and remember that, but only use it for that one site. So this is why we do that. So this is the time it takes for a hacker to brute force your password in 2022. So you can see, and they do this using off-the-shelf graphics cards, so that you can see if you're using numbers, and even if you go up to 11 characters, it's instantaneously crackable. So we've gone for the 16 characters, mixture of symbols, upper and lowercase, and you can see it should take 92 billion years, but that was in 2022, and the systems are getting faster and faster, so that will be getting shorter and shorter. So that's another reason why you need to use multi-factor authentication. So let's have a look at stolen credentials. So again, stealing your credentials, if you're using the same password on the dark web, they've already got them, so it's easy. They can just whack that password in and get straight into your email, unless, of course, you've got multi-factor authentication. So business email compromise is where attackers use stolen credentials to take control of a business account. And what they try to do is intercept things like invoices and redirect them and say, actually, you need to send the payment to my bank account. And it looks like it's coming from you because they've got control of your email account. And this is becoming more and more common because the ransomware attacks are getting harder, so they're going for the easier targets. So again, protect your mail accounts and use multi-factor authentication. Just a bit of a note on phishing. So spear phishing is where attackers will actually get more detail about you and particularly target you. So in the case of someone like Tony, they would know he's the CEO and they've got his email address, and they would use attributes about him scraped off LinkedIn or scraped off our website and target him specifically and make it more likely for him to click on an email. And really the only way that you can guard against that, because as I said, 80% get through, only 20% 20% of emails will still get through email security. You need to educate users. And unfortunately, healthcare is terrible at phishing as well, as those other organisations have seen. And regardless of the size, we're the top 1 or 2. So healthcare is terrible at just clicking on email. And it may be because we get a lot of email, we're stressed, it's a high pressure environment. They rely on pressure to get you to click. 80% of the errors, like of all data breaches, include a human element. So 80% of them occur by error, privilege misuse, stolen credentials, or social engineering. They're not what people think where they're breaking through our firewall and the hackers are sitting there trying all the different combinations and ultimately they're going to break through our firewall. That's generally not what happens. It involves tricking someone. It involves getting them to misuse their credentials. So how do we mitigate those? Well, the best way is really to educate users. After 12 months of training, users are 70% less likely to fall for a phishing attempt. That's a massive reduction. But again, it only takes one to do it. This is just a requirement from a fairly new NPAC document that is requirements for information, communication and reporting. And this is really quite new for laboratories in Australia, but there's a requirement in that standard that says staff must have received a training in the awareness of cyber risks. And this is just a graph showing the reduction in time when you actually implement a training program. And we have the training program at the QAP, and they can be fun. And this one is a bit Netflix-like. I think we've had 4 or 5 seasons of this now, and I actually have people asking when the next one is, which is quite unusual for training. So let's have a look at vulnerabilities. So a vulnerability refers to a weakness or a flaw in a system, application or network that allows it to be exploited by an attacker. Laboratory information systems are a prime target and they're critical to the operation of pathology, but they often run on outdated software and they can lack the latest security patches, particularly when it's vendor driven. I said, don't touch it. Don't patch it, it's going to break. Some of them are really old and some of them are homegrown. I've done assessments for NATA where the laboratory information system's homegrown and runs on an old version of Access on an old system and they don't want to touch it because it will fall over. Inadequate access controls. Again, we spoke about auditing access to these systems and often over time, the access gets wider and wider for certain user accounts. So again, that's an area I'd focus on for auditing. Weak network security measures, lack of regular security auditing, so we're not getting external companies in to say, check out my LAS and Can you tell me if there's any vulnerabilities? And insufficient training of staff on cybersecurity practice. Again, train your staff on not clicking on phishing emails and also on cybersecurity in general, how they can protect themselves. It benefits everyone. We also have vulnerabilities in our devices, and as Professor Malik mentioned, some of them are 10 to 30 years old. They're going to have vulnerabilities if we don't patch them. There's ways that we can mitigate that risk, so we can isolate those devices from our network. We shouldn't be taking USB devices from our main network and putting them in the old device. That's a way to actually transfer things. Outdated software not supported by the manufacturer. Devices used with the manufacturer default configurations. I'm sure I could go into a lot of labs and log into their radiometer blood gas analyzer because everyone has the same password. So in that case, you need to keep that area secure. The labs should be a secure environment. Devices can run customized software that's difficult to patch, and manufacturers often don't want us to patch that software. And the devices weren't initially designed with security in mind. That's changing, but they were presumed to be safe and that they wouldn't be exposed to threats. So what should you do to secure devices? Where possible, put the endpoint protection on. And I would say if they don't let you put endpoint protection and they don't supply another solution, then you should be looking for another vendor. Ensure that you change the default passwords. That can be tricky, but you need to speak to the vendor about that. Know what devices you've got deployed and what their vulnerabilities are. If you get a vulnerability notification to say, ISTAT version 1.0 has a known vulnerability, you need to know where those devices are so that you can do something about it. And again, scan your network and work with manufacturers for looking for those kind of vulnerabilities. I've already mentioned training. I'll just jump over the connected devices. But again, that requirement for devices to be secure is now coming through. So the FDA is requiring medical devices be secured against cyber attacks, and CLSI is putting out new guidance around diagnostic instrument software, and that has a lot about cybersecurity in that new document. Incident response planning. So you should assume that you could potentially be attacked. It's a matter of time for many organisations, so you need to develop a comprehensive incident response plan. What are you going to do if you suffer a data breach? Are you going to be okay running on paper for a month? Do you remember what it was like running on paper for a month? You should practice. You need to practice these. So define the roles and responsibilities and make sure that when this disaster happens, that you're ready for it and everyone has clear responsibilities in the response. And remember to train and simulate this kind of incident response. So what would you do if you had a cyber attack? How would you keep the critical parts of your organisation going? And this will often be in conjunction with your central IT teams, but it's important that pathology understands how it impacts them, because you saw that that was just an LIS attack in the UK, and it took the entire hospital system down. And continuous monitoring. So this is the hardest. So trying to determine if somebody is in your system, they'll get in there and often just sit there. And it's often hard to detect them, but you need to deploy those kind of tools. Post-incident analysis and improvement. So after you've had an incident, or even if you're simulating an incident, do that post-incident analysis and look at what you could do better next time. Just in relation to that downtime, Peter reminded me when we were working at St Vincent's and had downtime that we were able to easily cope with it because we went back to a format on the analyzer that we'd built, a custom format on the analyzer that we could just tear off and give to the ward, and it was already a kind of pseudo report. So where your systems allow it, build that downtime report into the analyzer and test it. And then you won't have to be handwriting results out and potentially making transcription errors. And again, have you tested your downtime procedures? I think I've got 1 minute left. I just wanted to mention that AI is becoming the next risk. So we're using AI in EHRs now, and that can be poisoned with prompt injection attacks, which is going to bring another level of risk to pathology and EHRs. And I just thought I would finish off with this AI-generated image of a lab being cyber attacked, and you can see that AI hasn't got it quite right there in the background. There's 3 Petronas towers. So, thank you very much.
There's 3 questions. Thanks, Derek. We're running a couple of minutes behind, but there are a couple of questions that are relevant that I might get Derek to answer.
The first one is, how about threats coming from using only one user account who has the maximum level of access? This happens in some organisation. Absolutely it does, and it shouldn't. You shouldn't use generic accounts anywhere, and especially if they've got the highest level of access, you shouldn't be using generic accounts. So that's really bad practice, and it's just an attack waiting to happen. Most of the vendors can request remote access to the system. How secure are the remote access, and how can we monitor them? Can you suggest any solution or software for it? Again, that depends on what solution they're using to remote access. I would suggest that that use an unlock method so that they don't have access all the time, and that someone in your organisation is required to grant them that access every time they want to get access. Lots of cyber attacks on EQA providers. How to ensure that the info of the user are not affected. What is RCPA risk mitigation, I think that is, on this, as a result are sent using a local network. I'm not sure what.
I think are we secure? I think that's the
Oh, okay. So, so we regularly have our systems externally penetration tested. So we try to even get them to trick our users into giving them access. So we use a secure cloud-based solution called Heroku that is a personal space of ours. And the routing for that is behind a solution called Cloudflare. It's a web application firewall that protects that website and only allows traffic from Cloudflare to that website. So only our office or external traffic through Cloudflare can access the MyQAP portal.
Do you mind taking that off? And I'll come. Sure. Thanks, Derek. If there's any further questions that you have of Derek, he will be around at lunchtime and for the rest of the day.